Your approved leave request for October 15th to 20th has been canceled due to critical business needs. That's what the email from Jennifer Martinez, our VP of Operations, said when it arrived in my inbox on a Monday morning in September 2023, sent with the casual authority of someone who believed management could override employee plans whenever it suited company priorities. Canceled due to critical business needs. I'd been production coordinator at Apex Manufacturing for 8 years, managing production schedules and workforce allocation for our automotive parts facility that employed 327 union workers across 3 shifts, ensuring every production line was properly staffed and every labor agreement provision was followed so that parts shipped on time and the company avoided the kind of labor disputes that could shut down operations for weeks. But according to Jennifer, our new VP who'd been hired 6 months earlier from a non-union manufacturing company in the South, my pre-approved vacation during our scheduled product launch was expendable because she'd promised the executive team that the launch would happen on October 18th regardless of what it took to make that deadline, and she decided my presence was essential enough to cancel leave that had been approved 3 months earlier. I'm Taylor Brooks, and I sat at my desk at Apex Manufacturing reading Jennifer's email while knowing exactly why she'd made this decision and exactly what was going to happen when she tried to force a product launch during a period that the union contract had specifically designated as protected time. 8 years, 2 months, and 14 days of managing production schedules in a unionized facility, learning every clause of our collective bargaining agreement, understanding the difference between management authority and union-protected rights, and Jennifer had decided that labor contracts were paperwork obstacles that couldn't be allowed to interfere with her aggressive launch timeline. I wasn't the executive who made strategic product decisions or the engineer who designed components. I drove a 2015 Toyota Camry with 134,000 miles on it and copies of our union contract in the glove compartment because I reviewed labor agreement provisions during my commute when other people listened to podcasts. I lived in a small house in Dearborn with a home office containing filing cabinets full of production schedules, shift rotation plans, and collective bargaining agreement amendments from the past decade that I'd memorized because managing union labor requires understanding the contract language that governs every aspect of workplace operations. My bookshelf contained labor law textbooks, arbitration case summaries, and 3-ring binders with every grievance filed at Apex over the past 8 years, annotated with notes about how management had resolved each issue and what lessons could be learned about respecting worker rights. I was detail-oriented, methodical about labor relations, protective of both company operations and worker protections, and apparently creating obstacles for a VP who thought union contracts were suggestions rather than legally binding agreements with enforcement mechanisms that could destroy product launches. The trouble had started 6 months earlier when Apex Manufacturing hired Jennifer Martinez as VP of Operations to drive operational excellence and accelerate product development cycles. Jennifer came from automotive supplier work in Tennessee and Alabama where she'd managed non-union facilities with at-will employment, flexible scheduling, and management authority to make workforce decisions without negotiating with labor representatives. She had that aggressive efficiency mindset, talk about high-performance culture, ownership mentality, and doing whatever it takes to win, that works well in non-union environments where employees can be required to work mandatory overtime, cancel vacations, and adjust schedules at management discretion. What Jennifer didn't understand, and what she'd refused to learn despite multiple attempts by myself and others to explain, was that Apex Manufacturing operated under a collective bargaining agreement with the United Auto Workers that governed every aspect of how we could schedule work, assign overtime, approve leave, and manage production operations. The contract wasn't optional. It was a legally binding agreement negotiated between Apex and UAW Local 652 that gave workers specific rights and gave management specific obligations that couldn't be overridden by executive priorities or launch deadlines. Jennifer's first major conflict with the union happened in May when she tried to implement mandatory Saturday overtime for all production workers to accelerate a customer delivery schedule. She'd sent an email announcing that all hourly employees would be required to work Saturdays through the end of June. Within 2 hours, Marcus Williams, the local 652 shop steward, was in Jennifer's office explaining that mandatory weekend overtime required 48 hours advance notice per Article 9.3 of the contract, that workers had the right to decline weekend overtime if they had schedule conflicts, and that Jennifer's unilateral announcement violated the labor agreement. Jennifer's response had been dismissive. Marcus, I understand you have a contract, but we also have business commitments to customers. Sometimes we need flexibility to meet those commitments. I'm asking everyone to be team players and work the Saturdays we need to hit our targets. Marcus had calmly explained that being a team player didn't override contractual rights, that the union would file a grievance if management tried to discipline workers who declined the improperly noticed overtime, and that Jennifer needed to follow the contract procedures for scheduling weekend work. Jennifer had backed down on that specific issue but had made comments afterward about union contracts, creating rigidity that prevents operational agility, and how Apex needed to evolve beyond outdated labor relations models. I tried to explain to her that our contract wasn't outdated. It was the foundation of workplace stability that had allowed Apex to maintain a skilled workforce for decades while competitors dealt with high turnover and quality problems. Jennifer had told me that I had a union mindset that was preventing me from seeing opportunities to drive performance improvements. The second conflict had happened in July when Jennifer tried to reassign workers between production lines without following the bidding procedure specified in Article 6.2 of the contract. The contract required that when positions opened on different production lines, they had to be posted for bidding and awarded based on seniority and qualifications. Jennifer wanted to move people around based on immediate production needs without going through the bidding process. Marcus had filed a grievance. Apex's labor relations manager had sided with the union, explaining to Jennifer that the reassignment violated clear contract language. Jennifer had complained to the executive team that the union was blocking necessary operational flexibility. By September, Jennifer and I were having regular disagreements about production scheduling decisions that she wanted to make without considering contract implications. I'd explained that her proposed approach would violate Article X of the labor agreement and would result in grievances. She'd respond that I was being too focused on technical contract provisions, instead of supporting business objectives. The CEO, David Richardson, generally supported Jennifer because she projected confidence and talked about driving results, while I was characterized as being overly cautious about union relations. The product launch that triggered the crisis was a new line of electric vehicle battery housing components that Apex had spent 2 years developing for a major automotive OEM. The launch was strategically important. It represented Apex's entry into the growing EV supply market and was expected to generate $35 million in annual revenue once production ramped up. The customer had specified an October 18 launch date for first production units, tied to their own vehicle production schedule, and Jennifer had committed to meeting that date as a way to demonstrate Apex's reliability as a supplier partner. The challenge was that October 18 fell during a period that our union contract designated as Fall Production Adjustment Period under Article 14.7. This was a provision that had been negotiated in our 2019 contract renewal to address seasonal production patterns. The language stated, during the Fall Production Adjustment Period from October 15 to 22 annually, management agrees to minimize production schedule changes, limit mandatory overtime to emergency situations only, and respect all pre-approved employee leave without cancellation except in cases of facility emergency as defined in Article 2.9. The provision existed because in previous years, management had routinely canceled fall vacations and imposed heavy overtime during October production ramps, causing significant worker dissatisfaction and multiple grievances. The union had negotiated the Fall Production Adjustment Period as a compromise. Workers would accept intensive production schedules before and after that week, but during October 15 to 22, management had to respect the existing schedule and approved leave unless there was a genuine facility emergency. I had approved leave for October 15 to 20 back in June, 6 months in advance, specifically because I knew the Fall Production Adjustment Period would limit scheduling flexibility and I wanted to visit my sister in Colorado during a time when I knew management couldn't disrupt my plans with last-minute work demands. Several other employees had also scheduled vacation during this period for the same reason. In early September, Jennifer had finalized the October 18 launch date with the customer and began planning production ramp-up. When she reviewed the staffing schedule and saw that I had approved leave during the launch week, along with 12 production workers who had vacation scheduled during the Fall Production Adjustment Period, she called me into her office. "Taylor, I'm looking at the October staffing plan and I see you're scheduled for vacation October 15 to 20. That's right in the middle of our EV battery housing launch. We need you here coordinating production during the most critical product launch Apex has had in 5 years. I'm going to need you to reschedule your vacation." I explained that my leave had been approved in June, that it fell during the fall production adjustment period when the contract prohibited cancellation of pre-approved leave except for facility emergencies, and that rescheduling would be difficult given that I'd already made travel arrangements. Jennifer responded that the product launch was a critical business priority that took precedence over vacation schedules. I explained that critical business priority wasn't the same as facility emergency, as defined in the contract, and that the union would likely file a grievance if management started canceling leave during the protected period. Jennifer's tone shifted to frustration. "Taylor, I need you to understand something. This launch is make or break for Apex's EV market strategy. If we miss this date, we damage our relationship with a key customer and we potentially lose $35 million in annual revenue. Your vacation isn't more important than the company's strategic future. I'm not asking you to reschedule, I'm telling you that you need to be here October 15th to 20th to support this launch." I tried one more time to explain the contract implications. Jennifer cut me off. "The contract says management can't cancel leave except for emergencies. I'm declaring this launch an operational emergency that requires all critical personnel to be present. That's my management authority, and that's the decision I'm making. Your leave is cancelled. You can take vacation in November after the launch is complete." On September 18th, Jennifer sent the email formally canceling my approved leave. She also cancelled leave for the 12 production workers who had vacation scheduled during October 15th to 20th, characterizing the product launch as an operational emergency requiring all available personnel. On September 19th, Marcus Williams, the shop steward, filed a formal grievance on behalf of all 13 employees whose leave had been cancelled. The grievance cited Article 14.7 and argued that a planned product launch wasn't a facility emergency and that management's cancellation violated the fall production adjustment period protections. Now about 79% of you think I'm about to sabotage the product launch or coordinate with the union to strike during the launch window, and you're completely wrong. Subscribe right now, because what actually happens is that a union contract does exactly what it was designed to do: protect worker rights by enforcing agreed-upon provisions when management tries to override them, and executives who think union agreements are flexible guidelines learn expensive lessons about why labor contracts have enforcement mechanisms. The grievance process moved through its initial steps over the next 2 weeks. Marcus met with Jennifer and Apex's labor relations manager to discuss the leave cancellations. Marcus argued that the contract was clear: leave approved during the fall production adjustment period couldn't be cancelled unless there was a facility emergency as defined in Article 2.9, which meant equipment failure, safety hazard, natural disaster, or similar crisis requiring immediate response. A planned product launch didn't meet that definition. Jennifer argued that the launch was strategically critical and that the contract language about minimizing production schedule changes and limiting mandatory overtime gave management some flexibility during the protected period as long as they weren't making arbitrary changes. Marcus countered that respect all pre-approved employee leave without cancellation was unambiguous language that didn't give management discretion to decide that business priorities justified cancellation. Apex's labor relations manager, Robert Chin, privately told Jennifer that the union had a strong case and that Apex would likely lose at arbitration if the grievance advanced. He recommended reinstating the cancelled leave and working with me to develop a launch plan that didn't require my presence during the protected period. Jennifer refused. "We're not letting the union dictate our product launch schedule. If they want to arbitrate this, we'll defend our position that operational emergencies give management authority to make necessary staffing decisions." On October 5th, 10 days before the launch and 3 days before my scheduled vacation was supposed to begin, the grievance advanced to Step 3 of the process, which meant it would go to arbitration if not resolved. UAW Local 652's leadership made their position clear: if Apex didn't reinstate the cancelled leave, the union would not only pursue arbitration but would also exercise their contractual right under Article 14.7 to refuse any schedule changes or overtime assignments during the fall production adjustment period that weren't absolutely necessary for normal operations. This was the leverage the union had built into the contract. If management tried to override the fall production adjustment period protections, the union could enforce those protections by interpreting them strictly, meaning workers could refuse any special assignments, schedule changes, or overtime that went beyond the normal baseline production schedule. For a product launch that required coordination across multiple shifts, extended production runs, and flexibility to address startup issues, this would be devastating. Jennifer dismissed this as a bluff. They're not going to refuse work during a major launch. They know this. Product line is important for job security. They're posturing to try to get leverage in the grievance. Robert Chen, who'd been managing labor relations at Apex for 15 years, wasn't so sure. Jennifer, I've worked with Marcus and the local 652 leadership for a long time. When they say they'll enforce the contract strictly, they mean it. If you force this confrontation, they'll follow the contract to the letter, and that means we lose all the scheduling flexibility we need for a successful launch. On October 8, 1 week before the launch, Jennifer sent an email to all employees involved in the EV battery housing production line. The email outlined the launch schedule. Production would begin October 16 with first shift running extended hours, second shift would start October 17 with special assignments to support quality verification, and October 18 would be full production across all shifts with coordination between production, quality control, and shipping to ensure first units delivered to customer by end of day. The email concluded, "This launch is our top priority. All team members are expected to be flexible, supportive, and committed to making this launch successful." On October 9, Marcus Williams sent a response email to all union members copied on Jennifer's message. Marcus's email was simple: remember that October 15 to 22 is the fall production adjustment period under Article 14.7 of our contract. During this period, all pre-approved leave remains in effect, and members are not required to accept schedule changes or overtime assignments beyond normal operations unless there is a facility emergency. Members who wish to volunteer for special assignments during the launch may do so, but such assignments are voluntary, not mandatory. Contact your shop steward if you have questions about your rights during the protected period. Jennifer called Marcus into her office and accused him of undermining the launch. Marcus calmly explained that he was simply reminding members of their contractual rights and that management's decision to schedule a major launch during a protected period was creating the conflict, not the union's enforcement of the agreement. October 15 arrived. My vacation started. I flew to Colorado to visit my sister. Jennifer was furious that I'd actually taken the leave, believing until the last moment that I would back down and come to work. She assigned another production coordinator, Kevin Hayes, to cover my responsibilities during the launch week. Kevin was competent but had less experience with the EV battery housing line and wasn't as familiar with the detailed production sequencing required for the launch. October 16, the first day of production ramp-up, started smoothly. The first shift ran the initial production units through the line. Quality control checked the parts. Everything looked good until late afternoon when Jennifer tried to extend the first shift by 2 hours to accelerate the production schedule. Under normal circumstances, offering overtime to first shift workers would be straightforward. Most workers welcomed the extra pay and would volunteer for additional hours. But this wasn't normal circumstances. This was the fall production adjustment period, and the union was enforcing the contract strictly. When Jennifer posted the overtime opportunity, Marcus reminded first shift workers that they weren't required to accept overtime during the protected period unless it was necessary to complete their normal shift obligations. Of the 43 first shift workers on the EV battery housing line, 39 declined the voluntary overtime. Jennifer's plan to run extended first shift production collapsed. Jennifer tried to address this by bringing in second shift workers early to bridge the gap. But early start times constituted a schedule change, and under Article 14.7, workers could decline schedule changes during the protected period. Second shift workers, following Marcus's guidance, declined to come in early. The second shift started at their normal 3 p.m. time, creating a 2-hour gap in production coverage that Jennifer had planned to fill with overtime. October 17, the second day of ramp-up, brought more problems. Jennifer had planned special quality verification assignments where experienced workers from other production lines would temporarily join the EV battery housing line to support quality checks during the critical startup period. Under normal circumstances, these cross-line assignments would be straightforward. Workers would be assigned to the special project and would follow management's direction. But again, this was the fall production adjustment period. Cross-line assignments constituted schedule changes that workers could decline during the protected period unless those assignments were necessary for normal operations. The quality verification wasn't part of normal operations, it was a special launch activity. When Jennifer tried to assign 8 workers from other lines to support the EV launch, 7 of them declined, citing Article 14.7 protections. Jennifer's quality verification plan collapsed. Kevin Hayes, filling in for me, tried to work around these scheduling problems by reshuffling assignments and finding volunteers who would accept the special projects. He managed to keep production moving but at a much slower pace than Jennifer's aggressive launch plan required. By end of day October 17, production was running approximately 6 hours behind the schedule Jennifer had committed to the customer. October 18, the actual launch date, was supposed to be the day when everything came together: full production across all 3 shifts, final quality checks, packaging, and shipment of first production units to the customer by end of day. Instead, October 18 became the day when Jennifer's product launch completely collapsed. The problem started at 6 a.m. when the first shift arrived and Jennifer tried to implement her launch day coordination plan, which required the first shift to start 30 minutes early for a pre-shift meeting about launch priorities. Starting 30 minutes early was a schedule change. Workers declined. The pre-shift meeting didn't happen. Production started at the normal 7 a.m. time, already putting the day 30 minutes behind schedule. At 9:30 a.m., a quality issue was identified on one of the production units. The part dimensions were slightly out of specification, requiring diagnosis of whether this was a tooling problem, a material problem, or an operator error. Jennifer wanted to pull together a cross-functional team including production workers, quality engineers, and maintenance technicians to diagnose and fix the issue immediately. Under normal circumstances, this would be straightforward: pull people from their regular assignments for a few hours to solve the problem. But during the fall production adjustment period, pulling people from their regular assignments constituted schedule changes that workers could decline. Jennifer couldn't force workers to join the quality problem-solving team. She could only ask for volunteers. Most workers declined, preferring to stay on their normal assignments rather than getting pulled into a high-pressure troubleshooting situation during a week when the contract protected them from special demands. Jennifer spent 2 hours trying to assemble an adequate troubleshooting team with limited success. By the time they diagnosed the quality issue, a tooling calibration problem that required maintenance adjustment, it was early afternoon and production was now 5 hours behind schedule. The customer was expecting the first production units to ship by the end of day. At the current pace, there was no way to meet that commitment. Jennifer tried one more emergency measure. She announced mandatory overtime for the second shift, requiring all second shift workers to stay for 2 additional hours beyond their normal 11 p.m. end time to make up for lost production. This was her breaking point. Mandatory overtime during the fall production adjustment period violated Article 14.7 unless it was a facility emergency. A product launch running behind schedule wasn't a facility emergency. Marcus Williams filed an immediate grievance citing Jennifer's violation of the contract. He also informed second shift workers that they were not required to stay for the mandatory overtime and that anyone who chose to leave at their normal 11 p.m. end time would be protected by the union. Of the 38 second shift workers, 32 left at 11 p.m. Jennifer's mandatory overtime order collapsed. By end of day October 18, Apex Manufacturing had produced approximately 60% of the units promised to the customer. The shipment was delayed. Jennifer had to call the customer's procurement manager and explain that Apex couldn't meet the October 18 delivery commitment and would need until October 23 to ship the first production units, a 5-day delay that violated the supply agreement. The customer was furious. They'd planned their vehicle production schedule around receiving Apex's battery housing components on October 18. The delay would disrupt their operations and potentially delay vehicle deliveries to their end customers. The customer informed Apex that they would be assessing liquidated damages for late delivery per the supply contract terms, $25,000 per day for each day of delay beyond the agreed delivery date. 5 days of delay meant $125,000 in penalties. But that wasn't the full cost. The customer also indicated they were reconsidering whether Apex would be their primary supplier for the battery housing components, given that Apex had failed to deliver on the launch commitment. The $35 million in annual revenue that Jennifer had described as strategically critical was now at risk. On October 20th, while I was still on vacation in Colorado, Jennifer was called into an emergency meeting with David Richardson, Apex's CEO, and the executive team. David wanted to understand how a product launch that Jennifer had promised would happen flawlessly had collapsed into a delayed delivery, customer penalties, and potential loss of a major contract. Jennifer tried to blame the union. The UAW deliberately sabotaged our launch by refusing work assignments and blocking the scheduling flexibility we needed. They used a technical contract provision to undermine a critical business priority. This is exactly why union contracts create operational rigidity that prevents companies from competing effectively. Robert Chen, the labor relations manager, provided a different perspective. Jennifer scheduled a major product launch during the fall production adjustment period, which the contract specifically designates as protected time when management must respect pre-approved leave and minimize schedule disruptions. Jennifer canceled approved leave for 13 employees despite the contract prohibition. She tried to implement schedule changes and mandatory overtime that violated Article 14.7. The union didn't sabotage the launch, they enforced the contract that management agreed to. Jennifer created this situation by ignoring the contract and assuming she could override worker protections when it suited business priorities. David asked why Jennifer hadn't been advised about the contract implications before scheduling the launch during the protected period. Robert explained that he had advised Jennifer multiple times about the fall production adjustment period provisions and had recommended either moving the launch date or planning a launch approach that respected the contract limitations. Jennifer had dismissed these concerns as union mindset, thinking that prevented operational agility. David asked if the problems could have been avoided. Robert answered yes, if Jennifer had scheduled the launch during a non-protected period, or if she'd worked with the union to develop a voluntary approach to the launch rather than trying to force mandatory assignments, or if she'd simply respected the pre-approved leave and planned around the scheduling limitations, the launch could have proceeded smoothly. On October 23rd, I returned from vacation. I walked into the office to discover that the launch had been a disaster, that Apex was facing customer penalties and potential loss of a major contract, and that Jennifer was being blamed by the executive team for creating the crisis through poor labor relations management. On October 24th, David Richardson called me into his office. "Taylor, I've been reviewing what happened during the EV battery housing launch. Robert tells me you tried to warn Jennifer about the fall production adjustment period provisions and the risks of canceling approved leave during the protected time. Is that accurate?" I confirmed that yes, I'd explained to Jennifer multiple times that the contract prohibited leave cancellation during October 15th to 22nd except for facility emergencies, that a planned product launch didn't meet the emergency definition, and that forcing the issue would likely result in the union enforcing the contract strictly, which would eliminate the scheduling flexibility Jennifer needed for her aggressive launch plan. David asked why I hadn't escalated more aggressively to prevent the situation. I explained that I had escalated. I'd documented my concerns in emails to Jennifer, I'd raised the issue with Robert Chen, and I'd been clear about the contract implications. Jennifer had characterized my concerns as excessive caution and had told me that she was exercising her management authority to make the launch happen regardless of contract technicalities. David was quiet for a moment. "Taylor, Jennifer is being terminated effective immediately. She demonstrated poor judgment in labor relations management and created a situation that cost Apex significant money and damaged a critical customer relationship. We need someone in the VP of Operations role who understands how to manage union workforce effectively while still driving operational excellence. I'd like to offer you that role." I was surprised. "David, I'm a production coordinator. I've never been in executive leadership." David responded, "You understand union labor relations better than anyone at this company. You tried to prevent this disaster and were ignored. You know how to manage production operations while respecting worker rights and contract obligations. Those are exactly the skills we need leading operations. The role comes with appropriate compensation, $195,000 salary plus performance bonuses, reporting directly to me, with full authority over production operations and labor relations strategy." I accepted the role. Over the next 6 months, I worked with Robert Shen and Marcus Williams to rebuild trust between management and the union. We renegotiated the customer relationship, absorbing the penalty costs but securing long-term commitment for the EV battery housing components. We implemented new procedures for planning product launches and operational changes that respected contract provisions while meeting business objectives. In March 2024, I ran into Jennifer at an industry conference. She was working as an independent operations consultant, trying to find clients after being terminated from Apex. She saw me and approached with forced professionalism. "Taylor, I heard you got promoted to VP after I left. That worked out well for you." I looked at her steadily. "I got promoted because I understood union labor relations and tried to prevent the disaster you created. You scheduled a major launch during a contract-protected period, canceled approved leave that the contract prohibited you from canceling, and then blamed the union when they enforced the agreement you'd violated. The $125,000 in customer penalties, the damaged supplier relationship, and the $35 million in revenue you put at risk. All of that was avoidable if you just respected the contract and planned the launch properly." Jennifer started to respond, but I continued. "You called me union mindset when I tried to explain contract implications. You told me I was focused on technical provisions instead of business priorities. Then you learned that those technical provisions had enforcement mechanisms, and your aggressive launch plan collapsed because you never bothered to understand that union contracts aren't suggestions. They're legally binding agreements that management has to follow." Jennifer didn't have a good response. She walked away. "Thanks for staying through this entire story. Everyone who's ever tried to explain labor contract provisions to executives who thought union agreements were obstacles to be overcome rather than binding commitments to be respected. If this resonated with you, if you've ever seen management create unnecessary conflicts by ignoring worker protections and contract obligations, subscribe and share your story. These workplace tales remind us that labor contracts exist for good reasons, that worker rights have enforcement mechanisms, and that executives who dismiss union agreements as technical paperwork learn expensive lessons when those contracts are strictly enforced during critical business moments.